Hello, welcome to Craig Explains Stuff. I'm Craig, and today I'm going to be talking about infectious diseases. So, first, we're going to go into a little bit of background because for a very long time, almost 1,000 years, people thought infectious diseases were caused by bad air or bad smells. This is a drawing from, I believe, the 18th century. There it says, cholera tramples the victor and the vanquished both. And this wasn't a completely terrible idea because getting rid of bad smelling things did, in fact, sometimes get rid of disease causing things. For example, at the time when there were a lot of horses on the streets, horse feces was all over the streets. And since that smelled bad, they would hire a dung collector to sweep the streets and get the get the feces off of the streets. And this, they did it because it smelled bad and they thought the bad smell caused disease. But to be fair, that did actually cause disease, and cleaning that up was a good sanitation step to help prevent, and it did help prevent disease. And it also helped stuff like if your animal died, you would get the animal carcass out of the house and you'd bury it or burn it or otherwise dispose of it. And that again helps stop the spread of disease. People would smell food, and if the food smelled bad and smelled off, it helped prevent food poisoning. So this did help prevent some disease, this theory. But obviously it didn't work all the time. Flu, one of the most common diseases, doesn't smell bad. It doesn't create a bad smell, and so none of these steps would help prevent any sort of flu infection. Also, they thought the opposite was true. If bad smells cause disease, then that meant things that smelled good must prevent disease. So people would often use florals such as lavender or lilac, thinking that that would help cure disease. And of course, that doesn't cure disease at all. So this idea was very pervasive for a very long time, actually all the way up until the 19th century. So fairly recently, like the 1850s, people still believed very strongly that bad smell caused diseases. Um, the competing theory and the theory we now believe that infectious biological agents cause disease, that's called germ theory. And this idea was actually first proposed by a man named Ibn Sina, and he proposed it back in 1025. He was a Persian man, and this didn't really take off outside of Persia. People didn't accept this, but he did write two very influential medical textbooks that were used throughout the Muslim world, and very importantly, he had very good controls for quarantining and to stop plagues and to stop epidemics. And people following his advice from his textbooks is one of the reasons why a lot of the plagues of Europe didn't then spread into Arabia or the other Muslim areas because the Muslims would quarantine sick people for 40 days or even people from sick areas for 40 days. And this helped prevent the spread of these plagues that were plaguing Europe from spreading into the Muslim world. So actually, Ibn Sina was a very influential medical professional that helped prevent a lot of plagues and epidemics from happening in the places that used his textbooks. But his germ theory did not catch on. And in fact, germ theory did not catch on until the invention of the microscope, when people could actually look and see the germs that were causing disease. Specifically, these two men. The man on the left is Louis Pasteur from France, and the man on the right is Robert Koch from Germany. And they are both considered jointly the father of modern microbiology because they isolated the microorganisms that cause specific diseases. So they were able to isolate about a dozen diseases between the two of them and their causes. Now, although they're both considered the father of microbiology, um, Louis Pasteur actually is a little more famous, and that's because the pasteurization process for sterilizing and making food safe is named after him, pasteurization. And Robert Koch did not get anything named after him, so he's a little lesser known, but people who study the history of microbiology are very familiar with him. So that's the history of germ theory and who popularized it and what people believe. So germs and actually microscopic agents that attack people and cause disease come into five major categories, and that's parasites, fungus, bacteria, viruses, and prions. And that's in order from largest to smallest, and that's the order that I'm going to talk about them today. So first of all, we have parasites. And parasites include, in fact, this is a louse, and lice is actually a big problem and is a parasitic infestation. And the reason why I'm bringing up such a large creature, because this lice are not generally considered microscopic. Most people can see them with the naked eye. And I'm bringing this up for a reason because, well, I'll tell you in a second. Two other very common parasitic infections are Giardia, which you get from drinking contaminated water or eating contaminated food. There's roundworm, which you get from drinking contaminated water or eating contaminated food. And actually, a lot of these parasites you get from contaminated water or contaminated food. And one of the best ways to prevent parasitic infection is sanitation, which is why there's so many charities that are trying to get clean water to regions of the world that are poor and don't have water treatment plants. But even in countries that have good, clean drinking tap water and water treatment plants, you can still get these diseases like Giardia and roundworm because there's still people who, for example, hikers and campers will still sometimes drink water out of lakes and streams. People who swim in lakes and streams will sometimes get water in their mouth and nose and get one of these infections. So, good sanitation is not 100% going to keep you from getting these infections. But luckily, there's a really good anti-parasitic medicine called ivermectin. And this is going to come up again later in this video. But ivermectin is basically a miracle drug for parasitic infection. It's actually a very recent drug. It was first discovered in 1975, and in the year 2015, the people who discovered it actually won the Nobel Prize for Medicine, because that's how important and influential ivermectin is. It cures roundworm, it cures Giardia, and it in fact is even a good treatment for lice, which is how come I put lice in there, because it's treated perfectly well with this anti-parasitic medication. There are other parasitic infections that don't necessarily come from drinking water, from contaminated drinking water or contaminated food. For example, malaria. The two dark spots here in this photo are malaria. Malaria is transmitted through mosquitoes. And here's a good. I'm going to take this moment for an aside. Um, Infectious diseases and contagious diseases aren't necessarily the same thing. Although most infectious diseases are contagious, malaria is an example of a non contagious infectious disease. Because contagious means it's transmitted from person to person. And malaria needs that intermediary of the mosquito. So a person who is helping or treating or comforting a person with malaria is not going to catch malaria from the patient, from the person who is sick. The only way to catch malaria is if a mosquito bites the sick person and then also bites you. So one of the best preventatives for malaria is actually mosquito netting. And malaria is also important because it's not treated with ivermectin because and that's a little surprising because ivermectin does kill malaria in lab experiments when it's isolated in a petri dish, for example, and it even kills the mosquito that carries malaria. But when they did human trials, it did not do anything for the malaria in human trials. And they think that perhaps with a much higher dose, it would treat it, but they've never actually tested it to see if it would be effective or even if it would be safe, because ivermectin at very high doses is not safe to take. So that is the brief discussion of parasites. So now let's move on to fungal infections. Now, fungal infections are actually very common, and the most common fungal infections that you're probably familiar with would be athlete's foot, jock itch, yeast infections. This photo is actually a photo of the fungus that causes yeast infections, and all of these infections cause itching and burning and redness, and are all easily treatable with over-the-counter medication because they're skin diseases. You can treat them topically with sprays or powders or creams. Also, there is yeast infections now have a oral medication that you can take to treat yeast infections. But fungal infections actually kill 1 million people a year because there are actually some dangerous fungal infections, such as this. This is Aspergillus. This is a fungus that will get in your lungs. And in your lungs, unlike the other infections of the skin, there's no nerves that indicate itching or burning. And by the time you realize that you've been infected by this and have actually started getting bad symptoms, it's often too late for the antifungal medications to actually work because there are, again, oral antifungals. There's also, but once the fungus reaches a certain point, it's too late. So early treatment is very important for um, these sorts of infections. But like I said, there's often not any indicator until you're too late and are having trouble breathing. But beyond that, fungal infections, there's not a whole lot of different kinds of fungal infections, even though they're common. Like athlete's foot is actually a very common infection for people who shower in gyms in joint showers. Um, so next, let's go to bacteria. There are a ton of different types of bacteria. I'm just going to show you a handful right quick. We've got um, this is the bacteria that causes E. coli, which is a type of food poisoning. This is the bacteria that causes syphilis, which is a sexually transmitted disease, of course. This is the bacteria that causes bacterial meningitis, which is a disease of the brain. And they're of various strengths. Like E. coli, a healthy person who gets E. coli, they'll be sick for about a week and then they'll recover. But if you get bacterial meningitis, you might actually die very rapidly from it. But luckily, they also have a miracle drug, antibiotics. Most bacteria are easily treated with antibiotics. So when you realize you're sick, you need to go to the doctor pretty much right away to get the antibiotics because some of these if they continue like syphilis or bacterial meningitis, if you don't treat them right away, they can make you very ill. Also, there are beginning to become antibacterial resistant um, excuse me, they're antibacterial resistant bacteria. And the reason why those are starting to be on the rise is because there was a time period when antibiotics were overprescribed. And antibiotics were being overprescribed because people would go, they'd be like, oh, I'm sick, I need some antibiotics, when in fact they had a viral infection. One of the things about these medicines is they tend to only treat the diseases in their groups. Like antibiotics only treat bacterial infections. The antifungals only treat fungal infections. And the antiparasitic, ivermectin, really only works against parasites. So they only work within their group. So doctors prescribing bacteria to people who were sick who wanted it but actually had viral infections, it um, started creating some antibiotic resistant bacteria, which most of these actually only reside in hospitals. So, ironically, you're only going to get sick with these untreatable diseases in a hospital. So now we have the last category of, well, no, not the last, the next to last category of infectious disease, and that would be viruses. Viruses, there's debate as to whether viruses should be counted as living organisms because viruses are just a strand of either DNA or a strand of RNA um, inside a protein shell. And I'm going to show you some pictures of some of the more common viruses. This one is chickenpox. This one is influenza. This one is HIV. And this one is COVID-19. And viral infections are hard to treat once you've caught the disease because viruses work like this. They're usually RNA, but sometimes DNA inside a shell. And unlike the other diseases I've mentioned here, which are full life forms, this is all that there is. There's not a full cell. Like a bacteria is a single-celled organism, but it's a full cell with a nucleus, with the mitochondria. Viruses don't have that. Viruses are just RNA inside a protein shell, which is why a lot of people don't think they qualify technically as life forms. And what they do is, again, this is COVID-19, and you can see how it's got these protrusions all over it. And these protrusions, um, they connect to certain parts of a cell inside the human body. And they typically only attack a certain kind of cell. And what they do is once they've latched onto a cell, then they inject their RNA into the cell. And the RNA can replicate inside the human cell. Viruses cannot otherwise replicate. Since they're not full cellular creatures, they have no means of reproduction. They can't even do cell division to reproduce. So, one of the reasons why viruses can be bad is because antiviral medication is actually really hard to make. Again, I'm going to reference the other diseases. Bacteria, fungus, parasites, they're all separate creatures that live outside of your cells, and the medicine can go and it can go attack the the organism that is attacking you. Since a virus injects its RNA into your cells, it's very difficult to make a medicine that can go find the virus and kill it without killing your cell too. And if it's destroying your cell too, then it's almost as bad as the disease is. So the best way to actually fight viral infections is with vaccinations. Now, vaccinations are for some reason a controversial topic, and they shouldn't be. But there's a lot of people they're called anti-vax. They're completely anti-vaccine. But here's why you have to use vaccinations to attack viruses. because, again, antiviral medicines have trouble finding a way to attack a virus. But if you are vaccinated, then you already have the medicine in your body. So as soon as the virus gets in your body, you can the virus will be attacked before it latches onto any of your cells. So it kills the virus before it starts attacking your cells at all. So basically, what a vaccine is just medicine you're given before the virus attacks. So I'm not really sure why I don't really understand the anti-vax movement because it's just preventative medicine rather than medicine you take after you've already gotten sick. And I don't understand why there's so much resistance to vaccines when there's not any resistance to other medication. So the last type of disease-causing agent is a prion. Now, prions are even smaller than viruses. Remember I said that a virus is basically not even a full cell. Well, a prion is actually just a twisted protein strand, and you can't even see them with a regular microscope. These are prions here, and they're taken with a special atomic microscope. So you have to actually look at them on the atomic level in order to find them. So prions are very dangerous because they're very small, they're very hard to detect, and once they're in your body has no real way to fight them off. And what they are is they're not, like I said, they're not even a life form. They're just a protein that is twisted, and these twisted proteins can cause proteins inside your body to twist, and this almost always is in the brain. And once the proteins in your brain start twisting, it causes very rapid dementia, and prion diseases almost always kill you within a year. And two of the most well-known prion diseases is variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and that's related to mad cow disease. Mad cow disease was a disease that was actually a very bad problem in England in the 1990s. And you can get variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease by eating meat from a cow that had mad cow disease. And like I said, it will cause very rapid dementia and um, death within 1 year. And the other famous prion disease is called Kuru, and you get that from eating human brains. So basically, through cannibalism. So you're probably not going to catch Kuru unless you're a cannibal. And bluntly, you're probably not going to catch variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease either because you can only get it from eating meat that's been infected from a mad cow. And mad cow disease pretty much was confined to England in the 1990s. So these diseases are super rare, but they're terrifying because it's hard to detect them. It's hard to there's no medication for them. There's no cure, and prion diseases are probably the worst of all the diseases that I've currently mentioned. So that's me explaining infectious disease. If you like this, please click like or subscribe. Um, there should now be another video being recommended to you by YouTube. So please go check that out. And if there's other topics you want to hear about, you can mention it down in the comments below. So once again, I'm Craig, and this has been Craig Explains Stuff. Thank you very much.